Hi, everybody, and welcome to Under the Dome. I'm Teresa April, the Public Information Director for the City of Pearl, and we have a special guest today. We're here with Representative Gene Newman, and he has brought the Speaker of the House, Jason White, to join us. So we are excited to have you here. Looking forward to a great conversation.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, well, so we'll start off just kind of right now, how are things going? Obviously, we've had a couple weeks to relax a little.
If you want to call it that.
We only had about a week now because we were still officially in until last Wednesday.
Oh, that's right. I forgot that it's only been that long. Does it feel like anything's different, or are we still turning our wheels?
No, it feels different for sure. But the last couple of weeks, things that, you know, in the heat of the session, you put off a bunch of stuff. It's like, well, I'll deal with that as soon as session is over, whatever it is. And it's politically related. Well, all of those things came home to roost the last 2 weeks. So the things that you put off for 2 weeks, you've been tying up all these other loose ends and that sort of thing. So,
absolutely. Well, and that's got to be something that, you know, as you look forward to the end of the session, it's kind of like a lot of things in life. We think, boom, that's over. Now I can go have fun. But there's still so many things to clean up.
Right.
So, okay, well, and Speaker White, tell us about you. Now, you've been around for a while. But as Speaker of the House, this has been your first full term. So talk to me about kind of, first of all, tell us who you are, tell us about your family, that kind of thing. And then what was it like to do this for the first time?
This was my 13th session. So I had three 4-year terms under my belt. My hometown is Kosciusko, right in the center of the state. And I still practice law there in my hometown. Ever since I graduated law school from Mississippi College in 1998. I've been there practicing law. Now, I live in the little bitty town of West, which is my wife's hometown. It's about 15 minutes from Kosciusko. It's a suburb of town, maybe, if you will. So anyway, first session as Speaker for sure, but especially over the last 4 years, I was a Speaker pro tem under Philip Gunn. And so Philip, you know, he let me have a hand in a lot of things and kind of see how the deal worked. And so that was a good experience for me, but still, it being the first session, there was I underestimated the time component of just dealing not only with legislation and referring bills and committees and all the flow of that, but just the other individual things that come with the job, from helping members with their specific requests and things that are important to them in their district, you know, because just like me, there's 122 members in our House of Representatives. 24,000 people sent each one of those to the Capitol with an agenda that might look a lot different than mine or Gene's or anybody else's. So I underestimated what it takes to kind of make all that mesh and flow and work together. Trial by fire almost. Right. Yeah. Right. Even having some experience in there, you know, and being involved in some of the decisions over the last 4 years, it got real and it was fast.
He'd been there all those years and he didn't realize how many lobbyists there were.
That's a whole nother aspect.
How many meetings he had to have with all, because they all have different constituents. I mean, you might have one lobbyist walking in the door and he's got 6 different customers that he's working for and representing with 6 different issues, and he's trying to listen to all that. So he had his hands full this year.
Sure. Well, and I always think of, as a journalist, I always had people coming at me with things they wanted, stories they wanted told, agendas they wanted pushed, that kind of thing. And I can only imagine in y'all's job, but particularly in yours, that it's that every day. It's all day long.
It's that every day, all day long. And I'm a lawyer by trade. That's what I do in my real job. And so I have to remind myself, as Gene talks about the lobbyists, they're friends of ours. They're professionals and they're good at their jobs. Mm-hmm. But they get paid a lot of money by their clients, the folks they represent, to push an agenda or an issue or to shave a little bit on this law or this statute or whatever in a way that benefits their clients. Now, our job is to make sure whatever we're doing in that space is what's good for Mississippians. And so, you know, sometimes you have to tell your friends no. You know, you like them, they support us in our races, but you've still got to always weighing what is best for Mississippians. And so that does get a little bit tricky, but it's part of the job for sure.
Well, and that comes back to what we've talked about, which is you may be at battle on either side of the aisle, but at the end of the day, everybody's pretty cool with each other.
Right, and that's it's an interesting thing, especially for the pages that come. And we have young folks, mostly high school kids, come and page during the session for a week at a time. And on Fridays, they get a pick with me up on the stand before we adjourn for their final day. And I ask every one of them, I say, what did you learn this week? And some of them might say something about the legislative process or things like that. But invariably, almost all of them say that y'all are actually friends. Mm-hmm. And they're surprised that we can fuss and fight on an issue, maybe hot debate on the floor and pointing fingers and shouting and all that, and then go to lunch together. Now, for me as a lawyer, that kind of comes natural with my job, but for others, and I tell freshman lawmakers when they get there, don't take everything personal. Your enemy today on this bill could be your best friend on this bill tomorrow. So that thing that whipsaw come back around on you if you're not careful.
I like to say that politicians, you can tell who's been around and that kind of thing by their lack of unsportsmanlike conduct. Twitter and everybody else in the whole world is out there trying to rip out people's jugulars, and you guys are really tough when you're in the heat of battle, but then it's like, nah. This is what we do. Get on camera, that's when you got to do your thing. Get off camera and let's go to lunch.
Right, and sometimes it's tough to separate those two, but issues, especially big issues, somebody's got to drive that issue. Somebody's got to be the tip of the spear, and sometimes that job's not always pleasant.
Sure. That
sort of thing.
Well, and speaking of that, we had some real hot button issues that we've talked about throughout this year on Under the Dome. And obviously from where you sat, there had to be a unique perspective also. So of course there's the list we can pull out, or if you want to take them in order of importance for you.
Well, we started off the session in January, and again, my first session as speaker, and we had 2 historic special sessions just before we got out of the month of January. Now those were fun, to start off with feel good, positive news, positive business developments for our state, almost $12 billion of private equity investment in our state. That was very exciting and kind of fun to be a part of getting that legislation going, getting those companies here. I believe the groundbreaking is today, maybe for AWS. I'm not sure. One of those is actually today. So seeing those come to fruition and being involved in that process was cool right out of the chute. And then we kind of turned to some more, I guess you'd say, controversial, or as you say, hot button issues, whether we were talking about the education funding formula or whether we were talking about healthcare and Medicaid, ballot initiative. The House passed a ballot initiative referendum bill early on. So that was kind of our first big topic that we took on, I think, right out of the gate. And then from there, they go. We'll talk about any of them you want to.
Sure. Well, I think the one that was the most misunderstood, and we've been through it at length, but is PERS. So obviously, that's something that most of Mississippi did not understand what was actually happening, even into the media, even into, some of the political cartoons we saw, that kind of thing. Talk about what it was like to kind of sit at the top and watch this whole thing unfold, knowing that you're seeing how the sausage is made, but the world out there is so confused.
Well, going back a few years, there had been some rumblings and some quiet conversations, even with PERS leadership and leadership in the legislature and at the Capitol about. I wouldn't say it wasn't a 5-alarm fire yet, but there were issues related to funding and sustainability. And so that began to bubble up more and more. And then, if you'll recall, about a little over a year ago, the PERS board voted to increase the employer contribution just on not a whim, because they had been debating it, but to the general public who didn't know what was going on, all of a sudden they're like, wait a minute, they're saying we're short of money and they're going to have to increase the employer contribution. Well, for us, when we hear employer contribution, we think taxpayer. Like, nobody's against PERS or PERS beneficiaries. I tell everybody I sleep with one every night. My wife's a PERS retiree. My parents are PERS retirees. I get it. That is their main source of income. It's been very good for them. They're both lifelong educators, my parents. But the issues about funding, and there is no denying we're down hovering close to 50% funded. And that is too low for a system that funds hundreds of thousands of Mississippians' retirement. And so we wanted to take a look at it. Now, then as you got into this issue of, well, we need a cash infusion, we need more money. And you can debate the reasons why. Some would say we increased benefits in the late 90s. Now that was before mine and Gene's time, but the legislature and policymakers at the time, they increased benefits for PERS retirees and did not find something over here that was going to pay for those. They just kept funding it the same way. And so finally, here we are 25 years later, and the chickens are coming home to roost. And so it's something we've got to deal with, and we're going to deal with it. And I can assure you, I think Sid Salter calls PERS retirees the third rail of Mississippi politics because of the constituency that they create. They are informed citizens, voters, taxpayers. No politician in their right mind wants to do anything that's going to upset 300,000 Mississippians who are engaged, especially about their money. So when you take that almost what leans itself to inaction on the issue just because of the hotness of the issue with, we've got to be responsible as policymakers to ensure that it's there, it's sustainable long term. We agreed to take a long, hard, close look at it. And those discussions eventually evolved into, does it need a cash infusion? Does it need a change in leadership? Do taxpayers need to have more of a seat at the table if they're going to fund it? Because now taxpayers fund 17.4%, and the employees fund about 9%. That 17.4 is, they had voted for it to go 5 to 10 points up. So now you were going to be looking at a 27% from the taxpayer and 9 cents from the employer. It was starting to get really out of whack. So that got everybody concerned a little bit. And I will say this, we had some good conversations with their executive director and agreed to take a measured approach. We funded about over $100 million cash infusion of taxpayer money. We wrote a check this session in one of the bills, $110 million. In addition, we're going to increase the employer contribution 0.5 cent a year for 5 years, and that will put it at 19.9%, and the employees stay at 9%. And we'll see what that does and have something to measure in 4 years, 5 years.
Sure, so this is kind of a long-term,
it's a long-term
we
thing.
did something this year, but we're going to be moving as we go.
We did that, and we'll be watching it. And again, nobody's afraid PERS is going broke next year or 5 years now or 10 years from now. But looking at it 20 and 30 years down the road, we don't want to be at a place where we're less than 50% funded. Lots of retirees coming online. We want it to be stable and be sure that it's there. And I hadn't met a guy or girl around the Capitol that wanted to do anything but enhance it and make sure that it's there for folks as promised.
Well, and I think the thing is, we live in a world that is not thinking about 20 years down the road anymore.
Right.
You know, everything is so instant. So the fact that you guys are doing this, I think potentially people were looking at, wait, what's going to happen today, when really it's going to happen to my kids.
Right.
That we're talking about.
Right. Or the person that's been working for the state 10 years, the school teacher who's been teaching 10 years, she's wondering, hey, in 15 or 20 years when I get ready to retire, is it really going to be there? Is it going to be, are the benefits going to be there that I've been promised, that I'm banking on, so to speak, in my retirement? And we want to be sure it's there. It's real.
Good deal. Well, another one that we've talked about a good bit is the Medicaid expansion or not. And I know that it kind of died where it was this year. You know, at this point we're not addressing it this year, but what do you see coming in the future in this discussion? Because that was another one there was a pretty tough struggle there for a minute.
Well, again, as I've already told you, this was my 13th session. I've been there 12 years. The Affordable Care Act was passed early on in my legislative career, obviously in DC. We've gone from a place where it really was not discussed. We didn't debate it. There were no real bills on it. Republicans took over House and Senate 12 years ago. And so under Republican leadership, we've done a lot of things over those 12 years. One thing we had not done was considered or even really debated the Affordable Care Act the benefits, the pros, the cons. And I would remind everybody, Mississippi already has a very large Medicaid population, if you will. And so that's why somebody might tell you, well, lots of red states or Republican states did this. They did it 10 years ago. They did it 5 years ago, and there was no problem. That's true. But they might have 50,000 beneficiaries. We already have 600,000, 700,000, 800,000 Mississippians who are on Medicaid. There's only 2.9 million of us. So it is the number one after public education, which consumes almost 50% of our budget. Medicaid is the next largest spend of Mississippi taxpayer dollars at almost $1 billion a year, with corrections being third at a little less than $500 million. So those three subjects, K-12, public education, and IHL, as well as Medicaid and corrections, take up about 60-65% of the budget. So we want to be careful if we are doing anything that's going to move any of those needles, because obviously the pie is the pie. We have the money to spend and nothing else. And so we want to be sure that what we did was smart as Mississippians and as policymakers and as budget makers, that didn't break the bank, so to speak. It was something we could afford. So we went from a place of no discussion, it's not happening, to a place of, I do think a consensus has developed around the Capitol as the business community of Mississippi, as well as healthcare community, faith-based community. Everybody started weighing in on this issue, and a consensus seemed to start building around, we need to do something for low-income working Mississippians. Now, what that looks like, lots of people have different ideas about what that looks like. I think some consensus centered around Mississippians were for this program as long as it had a work requirement, if you will. In other words, they didn't like the idea of an able-bodied Mississippian not working and getting free health care. Here's what I would tell people that are in that camp. Most of these people, the reason they don't qualify now for Medicaid or some other benefits, some form of disability, is because they're working. So will there be some element of fraud to any program? Sure, there will be. But by and large, these are people that make too much money to qualify for any other help, but they don't make enough money to pay for their own private insurance, or their employers don't provide it because of the nature of the jobs that they fill. So a consensus, while I was disappointed we didn't get something across the finish line, a consensus has developed around this idea that we need to figure out a way to cut down on hospitals' uncompensated care, the drag that it has on our healthcare economy in the state, and the drag it has on our health metrics. We are still the unhealthiest state in the union. We need to do something about that. And here's, the other thing is this. 40 states have now enacted some form of expansion under the Affordable Care Act. 19 Republican, I think, and 21 Democrat. It's not going away. We have a Congress that can't even agree on a resolution for Easter. They can't even vote and agree on that. They're not going to agree to repeal or change a program that 40 states have enacted. It's like my mama used to say, it's what's for supper. You can eat it or you can not eat it, but this is what's going to be for supper. And I just think with our unhealthy population, with the amount of low-income workers we have in this state that are uncovered, that don't have health care coverage, I think we're not being smart and we say we want to run government like a business. I think if this was presented to a business, I think a business person would figure out a way to make this deal work. And so that's been our approach. And my House Republican caucus, in talking to them as we debated this, internally for a long time, I said, come for the savings, come for what it does to our uncompensated care and what it does for our healthcare economy, for healthcare workers and things like that. If that's what it takes to get you there, stay for the compassion if it feels good to offer this coverage to people, but come for the savings initially if that's the reason to get you to the table. So anyway, I think a consensus has built around that idea. Now we've just got to figure out exactly the smart approach going forward. And I think you'll see folks continue to be at the table as we go forward.
I do want to add that at the end, the last bill that we had, but we were working on before it died, wouldn't have cost the state any money.
That's correct.
The way that it had been configured was that there's some, it actually would benefit us. We'd actually get more federal money than we were putting in, but the majority of it would have been paid for through the Obamacare money coming in, but the rest of it was going to be paid for by the medical profession.
That's correct. By the MCOs, the managed care organizations that serve this population through Medicaid, by tax on them. So all of that worked out. It certainly, under the House plan for the first 4 years, it was at no cost to the state. And as an enticement by the feds for you to expand Medicaid, you get an enhanced reimbursement percentage on your entire population, not just the expansion population, which for Mississippi, over 2 years, that total would be about $680 million that we would receive. Now, most states have put that money into making sure that their Medicaid programs run correctly and enhance some programs within it. We were willing to do whatever with that money. We were willing to set it aside for any cost overrun that might be out there, to show folks that we were serious about this from a financial standpoint, in that it not be a drag on taxpayers from that standpoint. And folks that would say, well, doesn't the speaker know that federal money is tax dollars too? Here's what I would say to that. Certainly I do. But our Mississippians are paying our federal taxes. We're paying into the federal government. 40 states are drawing down that money to cover this population. We're not one of them. So while I certainly agree that, nobody would have set up the healthcare system the way that it is in our country, and certainly even in Mississippi, if you were starting from scratch. Gene and myself and you could probably come up with something that looks a whole lot better to most reasonable people. But that's not the world we live in. We're where we are. Government is deeply embedded in our healthcare system, and we're trying to make the best of it.
Sure. Well, so that money that was on the table that would have kept it from costing us anything, is that still there next year?
It's still there next year, but we don't know for how long CMS and the federal government will continue to offer those type of incentives. So
Sure.
It could go away at any time.
Sure. It certainly seems like we're shooting ourselves in the foot a little bit by not taking advantage of that. Okay. Well, so obviously we had 1,000 things to talk about. Representative Newman will tell you, of course, that my big thing has been, all my life, has been first responders as a volunteer firefighter and that kind of thing. Of course, my work with police. I think y'all did some great stuff for the first responder community, especially the line of duty benefits, that kind of thing.
Increase the death benefit for someone killed or lose their life in the line of duty from $100,000 to $250,000. In addition, cover 100% of funeral expenses and those things. So I think that was a good first step. Another thing that some people might not have equated with public safety was we reinstituted mandatory driver's ed in our schools.
Oh my gosh!
which I won't say we reinstituted as mandatory. It never was mandatory, but most folks were taking it and using it. Now we've actually put it where it's going to be in our schools and be a class that you can take there, while you're at school. It won't just be some add-on in the summer or after school. It could actually be part of a school curriculum. So we're excited about that, and hopefully improve on our safety metrics for our teenage drivers in Mississippi.
I've noticed that the older I get and the more cranky, get off the porch type person that I am, get off my lawn rather, I have said multiple times, even in the driving, I don't have a lot of road rage, but the one thing I say a lot is take driver's ed. So I'm glad y'all are doing
we did
this.
Something about that.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that.
Speaking of education, we also made a little bit of change to education.
Yes. Talk about that.
And so that, to me, that's the biggest thing we did, because I hated MAEP. I mean, I have read that I don't know how many times through the years. I never did understand it. And I mean, when he became speaker, one of the first things I said was, we need to get rid of MAEP. And he said, we're going to work on that. So that I'll let him tell you exactly what all we did with it.
Yeah.
Well, that was a heavy lift for sure. And that was one of our top priorities coming into the session. And some people have said, you're tackling too many big things, because that was on the table. Medicaid was on the table. Ballot initiative was on the table. There were lots of things. PERS was, as we've already talked about, was on the table. So there were lots of big issues, and maybe that's the nature of the first year of a 4-year term. Lots of things bubble up from the election. But moving away from MAEP, which, it's been with us 25, 26 years. It was fully implemented. It was passed in 97, 98, and then fully implemented by the early 2000s. But in over 20 years, it's only been fully funded twice. folks could not understand it. And I understand the guy who wrote the formula can understand it, but the average Mississippian, the average taxpayer, and actually most educators don't understand it. It's not very transparent.
What senator actually wrote that bill?
Senator Bryan was heavily involved in that, of course. And, he's a smart guy, and
Yeah.
you know,
He is very smart, but
he
I
kids
never did
me.
understand his
You know,
bills.
he's kidding me before. If you can't understand it, you're just not smart enough. But my point in that is this: we wanted to move away from that, a formula that funded systems, and basically, whatever you funded this year, the formula set up for you to fund more next year, no matter how much, no matter if it was fully funded or what you did. It called for more. It always called for more. And nobody could really understand why or what we were doing. So we wanted to move away from that. And we weren't reinventing the wheel. Other states have done this. So we were excited to actually go to a more student-centered formula that you can understand. Schools are funded based on the actual number of kids that are at their school, not the historic number, but the number that are there. A base student cost would be developed for each student, everybody, that's equal. And then on top of that, weights would be given for, is that student special ed, is it gifted? Is she an English language learner? There are components for sparsity and low income, like different weights that are added to that base student cost of about $6,900, and then weights on top of that. So most people we talk to about it like it. They can understand it. School superintendents understand it. We think it was the way to go. We're proud of that work. It was a historic investment in public education this year. Another over $200 million new dollars went into the K-12 budgets for this year. We're excited about that. And here's the other thing about it. It's more equitable. Like, our formula was supposed to be funding in an equitable and transparent way. It was not very equitable. So the schools that need it the most will get more money. And no longer will they be able to say, the reason we're an F school district is because we didn't get the money. They're actually going to get the money now. And we'll see if the outcomes change or if they're the same. But at least we know the money is going where it's intended to go.
And you guys also gave teachers a substantial bump in pay this year, right?
Not this year.
No, that was last year.
That
Okay.
was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Last
Okay.
year and 2 years ago.
Wasn't there something for teachers this year that we talked about? Forgive me if I'm making this up.
No, there was initially the House wanted to rewrite MAEP. Okay. The Senate was not warm to that idea, and actually as late as with a week to go in the session said no. To counter that, they offered a $1,000 teacher pay raise, which, you know, I ribbed them a little bit because there was never any real intention of following through on that. I don't even think they did the math on that. The intention was to divert. The public had started to get behind what we called our Inspire funding formula. That was an acronym we named it for. It ended up being the Mississippi Student Funding Formula. We couldn't use the word Inspire, but we changed it to Mississippi Student Funding Formula. But it still had all the features of our original bill. So, but you're remembering right. The Senate did counter at one point. They said, no, we're not doing that new funding formula, but we'll do a $1,000 teacher pay raise.
That's what I had in my
Don't look
head.
over here. I kidded them that it was like a diversionary tactic. But
Sure,
anyway,
okay.
we got back on the real point late in session and got there.
Excellent. Well, okay, so what are some things that you worked on or that you backed or wanted to see happen that I wouldn't know to ask you about? You know, because we've come across several things that were like people's pet projects that when I heard about them, I was like, that's really neat. But I would have never known because the media was not on it, you know.
Well, I guess you'd say my pet projects were probably the school funding formula rewrite and finding some form of coverage for low-income working Mississippians. Those were our two main objectives coming out of the Speaker's office. We got one, we got close on the other one. Now, there were lots of other little things that affect every Mississippian's life that probably didn't get as much airplay because Medicaid or education dominated the headlines.
Let me give him credit for one thing that passed, the SAFER Act, which was very important in this day and time because it defines a man and a woman, a boy and a girl. so that bill died at one point in time, and he had to resurrect it through getting the rules suspended, and he was the force behind that being resurrected. So I'm going to give him credit for that.
I know a lot of people were really into that conversation, and
They
we're
were-
very glad that you did that.
They were really into that conversation. It was important. Now, it's a sad state to say that even in Mississippi, we're not talking about California or New York, we're talking about Mississippi, that we need to have laws that define a man and a woman. So that's a sad state. So, you know, from some standpoint, I'm like, where are we going as a society that we've really got to do this? I remember explaining this to my mom and dad in one of our talks here recently. My parents are older, they're in their mid-80s, and they're like, now tell me why y'all did that. And so anyway, it was an interesting conversation. But yes, lots of folks, Senator Josh Harkins here locally backed that early on. We had a version in the House as well. Now, the lawyers got involved and couldn't agree on some of the specifics at some point, and Gene and I were looking at each other like, we just want the bill to pass. We need to get this in place and get it in place now. So, yeah, that was a victory for sanity, I would say.
Yeah, definitely.
And safety, you know, and hence the name, the SAFER Act. So I was glad that we were able to, in the final stages, kind of pull one out of the fire and get that passed as well.
Absolutely. Representative Newman, is there anything you want to add?
I'm just thankful that the session's over. but I want to commend him for doing a good job. I mean, at times you could tell that he was drinking from a fire hose. Therefore, especially at the beginning when he was dealing with trying to get bills assigned to committees and trying to figure out who was on first and who was what was on second, all that. But he did a very admirable job of finally catching up and then leading us like we needed to be led. So I think he's done a great job this year.
I think it's interesting because, I took 7th grade civics like everybody else, and, I've been a reporter for a while and done a little tiny bit of political coverage, but I think it's safe to say that most Mississippians outside of the actual legislature don't fully comprehend what it is you do. Don't understand the amount of work that goes into it. I mean, even when we talk about, well, we passed 600 bills and there were like 3,000 out there, to me that blows my mind. But you're one of the ones that actually has to have your hand in all that.
Yeah, not only do they not know, the general citizen doesn't know about all that, they wouldn't believe it if you started giving them the gory details. They would say, no way. Grown people didn't act like that or do that.
Quit trying to be so dramatic.
Right. But every bill, and we had a couple of thousand of them in the House this year, that's somebody's, as you were saying, pet project or somebody's baby, so to speak. There was a lawmaker that felt the need to drop that bill and get that idea pushed forward. And so as members realize that their bill is dying, they tend to get a little bit, defensive and looking for somebody to lash out at. So the trick is keeping everybody, working to the same goal in spite of maybe when their bill dies, so to speak. Part of it, I guess.
Sure.
Now, we're going to spend the off season. One thing we didn't tackle this session that's high on our radar and agenda is tax reform in Mississippi. 2 years ago, we passed the largest tax cut in state history under Speaker Gunn's leadership. That will, at full phase-in 2 more years, we will be a 4% flat tax state. And it's states that pay income tax will be about 7th or 8th best in the country. We would still like to peel away at that and move closer toward no tax on work, no personal income tax in Mississippi. To do that will take a lot of people coming to the table. We also still have the highest grocery tax, one of the highest in the nation at 7%. We would like to cut that as much as we can. The problem with that one is it's a double whammy because not only is it a major sales tax generator for the state, but for cities, it is usually their number one sales tax. Now, where we are today, it's not, but in small and medium-sized towns where most rank-and-file, lawmakers like myself come from, in our small towns, the grocery store is the number one tax generator, sales tax. Well, the city derives most of their operational money, their brick and mortar that run their cities on, comes from that sales tax, from the diversion that they get. So if we're going to cut grocery tax, it's almost a double hit to the state because we got to make those cities whole in some way, shape, or form. So that becomes a juggling act to make sure all of that, works out. in addition to that, we would like to find a dedicated stream of revenue for MDOT, for roads and bridges, for our capacity projects. We had another historic year, spent almost $400 million of one-time money on capacity projects, mainly a huge highway project, Highway 15 coming out of Oxford, 4-lane in that, as well as adding a lane to I-55 in DeSoto County where that traffic is so heavy. Now just those two items alone were $250 million. So while I say we put $380 million there, two projects consumed most of it right off the bat.
Yeah.
So anyway, we in this tax reform that we're going to look hard at over the fall, summer and fall. I'm going to appoint a select committee of members who are going to do nothing but focus on that this summer and fall, and try to figure out a way for us to move away from income tax and more toward a consumption tax, and at the same time cutting grocery tax and finding a dedicated stream for our roads and bridges.
That's going to be some shuffling.
Yep, that'll be some shuffling. And when you start moving people's cheese around, they get upset, you know.
Right.
So we'll have to figure it out. It's what makes our job interesting.
Definitely. All right. Any closing thoughts from either one of you? I think this has been a great conversation.
You're very kind to have us.
Oh, well, we love having you guys.
I really appreciate the speaker taking the time to come
Yeah.
over here and sit down with us and talk to us about this past session. We look forward to the next session.
Sort of.
Gene helps head up our public properties committee in the House. So he'll be touring this summer to state-owned property, our college campuses, all of our state government buildings, to see the money that we are investing in those. Is it going where it needs to go, and what is the progress on construction projects and things like that. So he's I kid him, he'll be on the road tour, but he's got an important job this summer.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a lot of fun too. To kind of get to see things.
Yeah, you get to see a lot. You know, we have a very beautiful state, and I always enjoy just going out and seeing it. And we usually get to see things that other people don't even think about, especially on some of our college campuses that people don't even realize are there. But you know, I've done it for several years now, and you get asked a lot of questions from the people at the schools. You get a lot of pressure put on you
I'm sure.
for their needs, and there's always when a lot of our schools are old. They have a lot of old buildings, and it takes a lot of upkeep and a lot of maintenance on them. So they have a lot of asks sometimes. So but it's important for at least some of us to know what's actually out there and what's needed.
Sure. Well, one thing I noticed during my time with the Clarion Ledger, when I was traveling the state all the time, was, you know, you can be in your own small town and never leave, and you can think, well, Mississippi doesn't have much to offer. But when you get out there and you get to see it all, we're such a unique and beautiful state, and it's just so neat to live here when the whole rest of the world thinks, you know, well, we've got so much more than anybody knows,
Look,
even some of our own residents.
We really are. And like I talked when we first came on about the historic capital investment, you know, with the two new companies coming just this year in those two special sessions. But our unemployment rate is very low. We're a right to work state. Our universities are doing great. We have a great community college system. Parts of our state are really growing. Now, there's some places we need to work on, and I'll take some responsibility and want to run point on some of that and help with it. But by and large, some cool things are happening in Mississippi. It feels like it's more than just like this positive feeling of momentum. It feels like we have actually maybe turned a corner in all the metrics that are measured. Mississippi's a pretty good place to raise a family and worship and go to work and enjoy a quality of life that most folks around the country don't get to enjoy. You know, cool things here in Mississippi.
Absolutely. Makes up for the 115-degree summers sometimes.
That's right.
But I like it like that.
Yeah.
I don't like cold.
I don't want to
live
go
in
to negative
Mississippi.
15-degree winters.
I live in Mississippi for a reason, and it ain't to be cold. It's to be nice and warm.
That's what I tell them. I have family in Ohio, and whenever I go up there during the winter, I say, I live in Mississippi for a reason. So, well, I appreciate you guys so much for being here. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Representative Newman, always great to have you here as well. Guys, thank you for joining us as well. We're really grateful that Speaker White took his time today to talk to us, and we hope you'll join us next week, and I'm not sure what it holds, but it's going to be awesome. Have a great day.